Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Donald Gee, Andrew Stanley, and the Red Rocks podcast team.
Here we go.
All right.
Let's do it.
Welcome to the Afterthoughts podcast, live from South by Southwest.
Let's go.
We have two comedians here with us today, Donald Gee and Andrew Stanley. I'm not talking about Doug and Ryan, of course. Absolutely not. We're going to get into some fun, some faith. We'll talk about these guys' careers, what it's like to be a comedian in this world. And I was thinking about, Zach, who put this whole thing together. Thank you, Zach, by the way, Zach Tinney. And
go,
his
Zach.
team. There's like all these really important conversations being had at South by Southwest, like tech innovation and what's our future of the world, and even the faith component that is growing here, which is amazing. And then Zach asked us to do a podcast live at South by Southwest. And I'm like, man, he must have a heavy-hitting topic for us, and said we were going to be with two comedians. Let's go. And I have no idea what we're going to talk about. So this should be meaningful and move the world forward.
This does feel like a panel of people who just didn't make the cut for The Bachelor. It's just mildly good-looking white guys up here.
It's a huge honor to be a part of the largest, most popular podcast based in Austin, Texas.
Amen.
especially
Yes.
especially in the comedy world.
We were just officially named most popular podcast in Austin, which
Can't
is a
think
great
of any
honor.
bigger ones.
Yeah, they do say, by the way, the most depressed person is a former president, because what do you do after that? And guests on the Afterthoughts podcast express similar feelings post their experience of being on such a huge platform.
I'm already actually feeling depressed.
Yeah.
So.
Just the thought about,
just
you've
think
got
about
43 minutes, Donald, just to enjoy.
I canceled all my other podcast appearances for the next month just because I knew it would not feel good after this.
This is, before we lose everyone's attention, what's more important than this is these two are going to be doing some stand-up right after this, next door.
Right
Do
over there.
you want to get warmed up and just make fun of us at all? Would that be helpful? To just roast us?
This is the perfect way to get a comedian to tell a joke, is tell them to tell a joke. That is how you do it. Walk up to any comedian and say, "Tell me a joke, comedian." That's
make us laugh.
I also love to do an interview before a stand-up show for the same audience. So it feels perfect.
Like a get to know you.
Yeah.
I brought my notepad so that I would.
yeah.
Thanks for cheering for my notepad.
Yeah.
Question: where are you from?
Hi, my name's Donald Gee. I'm originally from Des Moines, Iowa. I'm 6'2", 135 pounds.
Oh,
or sorry,
God.
235 pounds.
Close.
But actually, we grew up in a small town kind of north of Des Moines, Iowa, in Johnston. We have a couple people from Johnston here. Yeah, my brother.
Couple people I grew up with.
Andrew Stanley. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, from Alpharetta, Georgia. Majored in finance, and now I just do stand-up comedy.
Obviously. What kind of funny are you? Like, what genre of funny do you
Mildly.
Mildly?
Yeah, mildly for him.
Okay, not great.
And I'd say above average. I don't know.
So,
This is so uncomfortable to be like, what's your style of comedy? And we describe it, then they're like, let's go see if they told
let's
the
find
truth.
out. We'll be the judge of that.
We can't lie, because they'll be like, oh, we just found out what they lied about.
You guys don't label yourselves as Christian comedians. You are comedians who are Christians. What is it like navigating a world of comedy as people of faith, but you're not just trying to reach a room full of Christians with lame Old Testament jokes? Like, what does that look like to be a clean comedian, mostly, in a world that is known as very filthy and unclean?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was it's so funny, people, especially being a cleaner comedian and performing in churches a lot, people will come up to me afterwards and they'll be like, oh, thank you so much for being clean. Like, we really appreciate it. We hate all those dirty comedians. And I'm just like, well, those are my best friends. So take it easy. But I think it really comes down to being authentic, and you don't want to hear somebody being clean that's not really wanting to, and you don't want to hear somebody being super dirty that was like homeschooled like me. Like, they're just gonna be like, something's not adding up here. And so it's about being authentic and being true to yourself, and being clean. You get a lot of opportunities sooner. Right? Even opening for comedians that are not clean, they would request clean openers. So I would get to do some of that earlier than some of my friends just because of that.
Yeah, I think kind of to the point Andrew was talking about of authenticity. I think in comedy, a lot of success is having a perspective that feels very genuine to you. And I think early on when I was like doing open mics and just barely starting to open for people, there was this feeling of, for me, what I wanted and loved the most was like people coming away feeling more joyful than they came in. Because sometimes, like you're talking about with comedy, you can go to a show and laugh really hard and come out kind of depressed because the person themselves, the comedian, is depressed or like is in a pretty dark place, because a lot of comedy can come from a dark place. And yeah, I had a phase where I tried, like 2 days, I tried to make some dark jokes, and it didn't work for me at all, because it just wasn't genuine. And the thing that I love the most...
The devil was like, we don't want you. You're not... We're trying to get some... You're good. You stay over there.
And yeah, so for me, it really came from that feeling of like trying to have everything be about being more joyful after the show than people came in, so, yeah.
I think you have to be truly gifted as a comedian if you can be clean and funny. Not using the low-hanging fruit of so much of the typical cultural stuff, whether it's sexual humor, just being vulgar, and that can get some easy laughs. But what's that like? Because you have constraints going into a comedy show that most comedians don't. How is that preparation? And then once you're on stage, I don't know about you guys, sometimes you just kind of black out and you're like, what happened up there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You got to stay within boundaries while you're doing that, as we do as well. And try to on a Sunday preaching.
Yeah, have you ever had any like major mistakes preaching on a Sunday where you went way past a boundary on accident?
Oh, somebody in the
Say
front
it,
said,
she
"Say
knows."
it." She's like, I was there for it. Say
She
it.
wouldn't know. She's been at our church since the beginning. She would have no idea.
What was the YouTube
Doug
video?
Doug has a good story of that.
Bring up your worst moments.
Yeah, I don't quite know how to tell it though,
You just tell it.
because it
Hey,
was.
you know that thing you regretted saying? Would you say that real quick?
Just say it.
In front of a live audience and recorded?
Would you say
when
that
I
your shameful
cussed
thing?
when I cussed during the sermon. So the word I said was, my very first sermon that I gave at Red Rocks Church about 10 years ago, when I first got hired, I cussed a few times. Yeah,
It wasn't like one of
you
the
know how-
7 main.
This
No,
is one of
you-
those churches where you can't cuss? What the?
You know how there's like different tiers of cussing, and this one I thought was way lower.
you know how sins
I
are
thought
not
this
all
one
equal.
was way lower shelf, and it was probably like, third mid top shelf or something like that. And I said it and I enunciated it a few times. I probably
Pretty-
said it 7
pretty strong.
times in the message, and it really hit home.
This is your first sermon?
Yeah.
I
at you now.
I was there just to cheer him on, and as soon as he did, I was like, oh.
Oh, and he has no idea. He is
He's just-
preaching his little heart
He's
out
just
right
as
now.
confident post saying that, but I'm not as confident about him keeping that job.
Everybody's
God.
dying to
You
know
know,
the
we
word.
really should fire him, but I'm kind of scared of him now. Like, he seems like a tough guy.
He's an animal up there. So
yeah.
anyway, you guys have some boundaries. What's it like navigating, having to be hilarious, but without being able to use a lot of the low-hanging
I'd
fruit?
like to clarify, I'm moderately funny.
Yeah, moderately funny.
Yeah, if you could use all the low-hanging fruit, you'd be hilarious, dude. For me, I always feel like when you're writing anything, like having constraints is helpful. Like I always feel like the hardest time to be creative is when it's like, all right, be creative. Just empty page, like whatever you want. It's just like, no, tell me like, write a joke about Baskin Robbins or something. Like then that's so much easier. And so I almost feel like constraints are helpful, and being clean is a big one. You can go tons of places with comedy and be clean, obviously, but I do think it helps narrow the focus of the types of jokes I'm trying to write, and I can immediately just rule things out if they come into my head, and you kind of can focus more on specific things.
I think kind of to that point too, like if you are focused on writing something that is clean, you're not going to get any of the sort of cheap pops or cheap laughs that you might get if you swore or if you said something gross that like sort of gets the shock laugh. And I think a lot of comedians have said this, like, it's the best thing you can do if you're starting as a comedian is to start for the first year and a half, just write clean jokes. Because you'll get, if you're swearing, there's other things, you'll get cheap laughs and think that you're being funny, when in reality the joke itself isn't as funny, it's simply the other things that are adding to it. And so, like, I think being clean is really a blessing in that, like, it forces you to think very intensely about the joke and really evaluate whether it's funny or if it's the other things that are making people laugh.
What's some of the material you found when like when you're at a church, when you're with like a primarily Christian audience, what's the material that just slaps with that audience?
Anything Chick-fil-A is like a cheat code. There's vacation Bible school, mission trips, all like the inside baseball stuff is like, but then you do it at the comedy club and they're like, what are you talking about?
I've never heard of Juarez. What are you talking about? You got any?
Yeah, I think family humor and because there's family is such a huge part for a lot of people in the church, whether it's the church family or like your actual family. And so for me, that's the go-to. My parents were hilarious, so I talk about them a lot, and they're not here, which is great. It'll be a good time.
But there are some people from Iowa here supporting
yes,
you.
The one.
Yeah, there he is.
Yeah, do it louder next time.
Okay.
It's like that could have been a lot less awkward.
I do like the point, Andrew, that you made, how, start by writing something clean, and it's actually a lot more challenging when you can't utilize the shock factor. I remember when the movie The Hangover came out, and to this day, one of my favorite movies. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that in this setting or not, but when they went to do Hangover 2, it was almost like they had used all their creative brilliance on number 1, and number 2 was they just went like shock factor and big for the whole movie, and instead of funny, it was funny because it was, oh my gosh, I can't believe they just did that or said that. And to me, I felt it had to be so much easier to do that than it is to create that original movie and that script. And there was something very special to that. And so I do love that idea of it's more challenging to not, when you don't have the shock factor and you can't, that low-hanging fruit that gets a big reaction, okay, so when you don't have that, what are you gonna create? Yeah, we oftentimes when we're writing sermons, we do our best at least to incorporate humor, because they say attention spans are getting shorter and shorter, and so you gotta like re-grab everybody's attention every like 10 or 15 seconds, and we put a lot of work into trying to make it as funny as possible. And I always vent to these guys, I'm like, man, if we could say whatever we wanted to say, this would be so much funnier than it is. And but actually, I don't know how true that is, the more I think about it. So I really appreciate what y'all just said. That's cool.
You were talking about, I've heard comedy sets where you almost feel like the person just put a backpack on you, like a gross backpack, and you walk out and you're like, ah, man, like, I didn't ask for that. I didn't need to hear that. You have a different goal when someone walks in and hears you do comedy. Talk about that and your hope for an audience of people, because some people that'll hear you are not believers. They're not walking in with any faith idea, and they just know you as a clean comedian. What are your hopes for audiences that hear your comedy?
Yeah, I think you and I were kind of talking about this earlier. The story that really hit home for me with that was when I was first starting doing comedy in Des Moines. One of my good friends, actually Carson Gifford, shout out to Carson. He's kind of one of the big reasons I started thinking more about Christianity when I was in high school, and then really came to the church. He was a huge inspiration because the joy that he had in his life was just palpable. And I was like, dude, like where is this coming from? And so he and I were best friends in high school, and he came out to a show when I was like just starting, and I could see sort of in him almost like a pain in watching some of the comics who were up there who were funny, and he was laughing, and then he came out of the show at the end and was like, man, dude, like I feel sorry in some ways for like the state or like the feeling, like whether it's depression or anxiety, these other things that people are feeling on stage. And it was funny to see him go into the show very joyful and come out deeply in thought and like, man, how can I like connect or help people? And for me, that inspired me to be like, okay, yeah, how do you really bring joy and make sure that's not the feeling people come away from a comedy show with? Which that's really where it started for me, thinking about like, how do you do that and how do you build that?
Totally. I, to be completely honest, did not get into stand-up for making other people feel good. Like, I got into it because I thought it'd be fun for me. Like, I didn't care what you guys felt like after I got. Like, I just wanted to go make jokes and make people laugh, and I still usually mostly just care about that. But you do have those moments after shows sometimes where somebody comes up to you and they're genuinely just like, I needed that, and I believe them, like that you can see it. You're like, hey, I hadn't noticed in my life that I hadn't really laughed a lot, but I think it maybe has been 5 years since I have laughed like this, and I had no idea how good that would feel for me. And it does make you feel kind of a responsibility, like, oh, I didn't know I was doing something important, oh no. Like, I guess there's some responsibility here. And I have been more cognizant of that as I've done stand-up longer, of like, oh yeah, we're doing something that is really good for people when it's done well. And but at the end of the day, I just like telling jokes.
I think comedy is maybe the biggest missing piece in the church. And maybe even you feel sometimes like you're caught between two worlds that don't really want to go together. Like, Christians are generally seen as uptight, take ourselves too seriously type people.
Not you guys, though. Not at all.
Oh, no. No, we're not good enough at anything to take ourselves seriously at all. Even our hope for this podcast when we started it was to humanize pastors and have some fun, real conversations, because if you're a pastor, sometimes people look at you like, please don't come talk to me. Like, you have to be the most anti-fun person in the world. But that's so counter to the nature of God, because if God made us, then he has to be the origin of humor, and he has to be funnier than any of us, even you two. Like, he created the concept of laughter and humor, so it comes from him. How have you connected to God through humor, an area that I think most people don't?
Wow, that's a great question. I think Pete Holmes said one time, he goes, I bet Jesus was funny. Like, I bet he opened the Sermon on the Mount with like a joke at the beginning, like, just to get the people drawn in, something. And I think that it's just, I think the root of it is the same as, what God gives us, which is joy. And I think this is, anytime we can create joy among each other, that's like a beautiful thing and a reflection of what God wants. So I do think that at a comedy show, God is like, oh, good, they're happy. I love it. Joy's good.
Yeah. I think I echo that totally. Like, for me, it is really about joy and having fun. And it's hard to find a time where people are more connected and like feeling a sense of community than when you're laughing. And if you're laughing together, you can talk about so many things, deal with problems if you're enjoying and being around each other. And so that's very much kind of based out of joy too.
In our world, the church world, there are some weekends where things happen, like somebody in the audience will say something or yell something or do something. I would love to hear from you two. Do you have any good stories about in the middle of stand-up? Maybe it's being heckled in some way, or a
never
crazy
happens.
stage story.
Yeah.
And
wait, I want to hear the ones that happen at church, though. Sounds way more interesting. Like, our people are drunk. What are y'all people's excuses?
They're on psychedelics.
I forgot where we are.
Yeah, they just rolled in from downtown. Like, let's check this thing out. Some of our security guys right now are like sitting up a little bit. They're like, yeah, stuff happens at church. We're ready for it.
and is when you have a heckler, is that something that you look forward to and embrace, or are you like, you're messing up my set right now?
For me, I feel like different styles of comedy inspire different types of heckles. I don't get a lot of mean ones. It's a lot of people that think they're helping and they just want to be involved. And they've seen a lot of clips on social media where the comedian's talking to the audience member and they're like, that's what I signed up for, is to do one of these clips with you. And you're like, we're not all doing that.
That's what I'm planning to do for you in your
Yeah,
your
please.
set
So
right after
knowing this, please just do not let me finish a joke in there. But no, I mean, the worst one is, funny enough, it was doing like a country club gig, and that's hard because they're drinking a lot, but you can't just kick someone out like you would at a comedy club, because like they're the owner. they own this country club. All the people there are like owners of it. So it's like they're all the boss. And so it was this one lady just kept yelling stuff out, and she like knew my dad. And she just kept yelling my dad's name to me. I was just like, "Yep, that's my dad." And I afterwards, you shut them down. You have ways to shut them down, but after the 5th time, you're like, I have no other ways to talk to you in a funny way. And I just like was like, "Man, please stop." You're just begging. Like I'm out of funny ways to handle this. And afterwards, every other person came up to me and was like, "We're so sorry about her. She's a problem at all of our events." I'm just like, could have warned me before.
But she kind of owns the place.
But she is the richest of us, so.
I think the most consistent, pretty much every single show I get, someone will be like, "You look like Chandler from Friends Fraternity Edition," or just something to do with Chandler. And you like that way too much. Yeah, there's something about that. Every single show, I think, for the past 3 years.
Because it gets that reaction right there.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, well, you brought it up. So your dad is a well-known pastor.
Oh, we're doing.
I'm sure you're most excited when people are like, "So your dad changed my life, blah blah." I met your dad once, and it did not change my life.
Yeah.
So I would like to tell you about that.
Yeah, please.
You might have changed his life, though.
He thought it was going to change his life in a very scary way. So the 3 of us traveled around the world for a year doing mission work, made a documentary. I like to say that like it's a stupid thing. It was like our life-changing year of our lives.
Yeah, don't
I'm trying to
downplay.
get to the good part of the story.
Yeah.
So we make this documentary that, of course, we're like, this is going to change the world. Everyone needs to see this, right? When you create content, you think the world has to see this. Well, we got back, and not that long after, we went to a Catalyst conference featuring your dad and Craig Rochelle and some other guys, and Doug and I were there, and we're like, those guys have to see our documentary. Yeah. Obviously, they don't have anything going on. They'll want to watch it on the plane and then screen it at their churches. So I went out to the car. We had these branded flash drives.
You went out to his car?
No, not his car, sorry.
I mean, you're that guy?
Might as well, basically. I went out to our car, put it on a branded flash drive, typed a little note, like Word document note to them on the flash drive, and then I went and got in line where your dad was signing books.
Which, by the way, a flash drive is like what every villain in every James Bond movie has, and it's like always bad news.
So,
everybody knows if a stranger gives you a flash drive, put it in your computer immediately.
So I waited in the book signing line, didn't buy a book, and we couldn't afford it.
Yeah. I have something for you.
I don't have $10 for communicating for a change or whatever. I don't care. He's like flanked by 2 security guys. Yeah. I get to the front of the line. He kind of looks at me like looking for my book to sign. I'm like, kind of give him the nod, like, you'll know what to do. And I hand him a flash drive. I've never struck fear like that into a person in my life.
He's like, do you have one of my children or something? Yeah. Like, what's going on? Is this a ransom flash drive?
10 years from now, I'm going to kidnap your son when he's a stand-up comedian. You better watch this documentary. He looked at me with like the true fear of God, like, okay, thank you. Please don't kill me. And took it like, I'm going to watch this. Yeah. I'm going to plug this into my computer. So anyway, great to meet your dad. Please tell him I said hi.
I'll ask him if he ever got around to watching that. Yeah.
His security guys were just ready to pounce. I'm lucky I got out of there.
Did you tell him there was a documentary on it?
I didn't have time. Because he's like trying to get back in to teach some powerful leadership thing. So I was like, here you go, man. Just check this out.
I think you're going to like what's on here.
It's like every episode of 24 is some terrorist with the
just
flash
so
drive.
Intimidated. Here you go, Pastor.
Yeah.
You'll know what to do.
You'll know what to do. Give him the nod. So anyway, sorry about if he came home living in fear.
I am happy to report that there's way crazier people than you we've had to deal with, you don't have to worry.
But anyway,
you were not memorably bad.
I brought that up.
You were just regular bad.
Hey, some of you could use that what he just said and tell me that in the lobby. You're not memorably bad.
On your tombstone one day.
I brought that up.
He was not memorably bad.
Yeah.
I wanted to know.
Forgettably bad.
When he came home, though, what did you think of our documentary when your family sat
when
down
we all
and watched
screened it together? Yeah.
How'd the note come across?
I remember it inspired me to not
be a
missionary.
It led you down this path.
Yeah. No, it's great.
Anyway,
it sounded like
so
you didn't need his help. Sounded like it went pretty good.
It went really well. Good to meet your dad.
Did Craig watch it? Craig's way scarier than my dad.
No, I wasn't going to give it to Craig. He
I
just,
saw
like,
Craig last
pull my
week,
head off.
and Craig's one of those people. When I'm around him, I'm just like, I don't know why. I just need him to like me. Like, you guys
Yeah.
have those people. You're like, why do I care? But then you see his
Yeah,
muscles.
they're all here today.
Who is Craig?
Craig Rochelle. Oh, yeah,
He's a pastor. Just Google him. He's a,
Oklahoma.
He's a cyborg of a pastor. That's who he is.
Yeah.
Okay, or not following that, your path, after you watched that documentary, you decided to go into comedy.
Yep.
I don't know exactly what got you there, Donald, but what has it done in your life, your faith, this journey of going into a road less traveled, or a road that a lot of people fail in? And obviously you guys haven't failed because you're on this podcast at South by Southwest, so you made it.
Austin's most popular podcast.
Yes, yeah, because Joe Rogan lives outside of Austin
Oh,
City,
okay, cool.
What's that journey been like? Like, you took a leap of faith to be a comedian.
Yeah, it depends on the day. But it's so fun. I mean, it's a dream job. Like, so many people that we know want to be doing stand-up full time, and every day I wake up and get to fly somewhere to do stand-up. I feel so grateful. It does feel like God has me here for a reason. As cheesy as that can sound, like I don't know fully what it is, but I think my whole life I grew up praying, like, Lord, please show me your will for my life, which is like a common prayer, and I felt like I never really had an answer to that. And then next thing you know, you're graduating high school, and you're like, what's your major going to be? And you're like, I don't know, God hasn't told me what to do yet. Finance seems broad, so I do that, I graduate, it's like, still nothing, I guess I'll get a finance job. And then I started doing open mics and doing stand-up, and I was like, oh, I think this is the thing that God has made me able to do really well. And I've never felt really good at anything until I started doing this. So the big lesson from that is, if you feel like God has not answered that question for you of what's your will for my life, don't stop asking. Because, it took me until I was 26, which I guess is not that long, but in the grand scheme of things. But it felt long. When you're 25, that feels like 25 years is a long time. And
I'm 26 right now. It feels
yeah,
very
dude,
long.
you'll probably figure out your will soon. Dude, it's coming up. This is your year.
We're going to pray over Donald at the end of this, just to hope he finds what he's good at.
We're gonna find it, dude.
I'm really hoping. For me, I think it was an interesting thing. So I went to Georgia Tech and did my undergrad and a master's degree, civil engineering, and then public policy.
You got a master's degree.
I did, yeah.
Dang, instead of
Donald
comedy?
is very overqualified for all of this stuff. It's crazy.
And I was very much on the path of consulting and having control, and I did that for about a year after college, and I had a moment when I was going into the office, and I was like, man, this does not feel like what I am meant to be doing. And I was doing comedy, and it was working to some degree, and I had this thing, I was like, okay, I want to do this, and I feel like I'm meant to do this, but taking that leap of faith from leaving an environment where you have control, you're making money, you have respect from your family or your friends, and an apartment, to do something that is so inherently risky, and you're saying, it's signing up for failure in a lot of ways, and you're going to fail. That really forced me to think about my faith in God, myself, and following a plan that I felt was right but was scary. And it really made me think deeply about those things and pushed me so much more into that. And there were moments too, so I left my job. I had a deal with myself. I was like, all right, if I make as much money in comedy as I do my job for 3 months, I have to leave, because I didn't want to. I was very afraid. And then that happened, and then I didn't make money for 8 months. And my brother remembers that, and everyone was like, "Shouldn't have left that job." And
we're gonna be passing baskets for Donald at the end. Yeah. Take up a little offering.
Yeah, I do need some prayers. But then there were moments where I was like, "Man, is this gonna work?" And then something would happen if I just kept going and had faith. I was like, I believe this will work. And if I'm putting in the effort and desire and putting myself into the world that way, I believe that it will work. And it was like every time that I needed something to work, it was like, oh, this college wants you to do this show, or this person wants you to make this content. And it's been a fascinating journey of like just being able to try to walk through and have faith that it will happen. And if it's meant to happen, it will. And so far, it's okay. I'm not killing
5 stars.
it, but I do have one more year to figure it out. So
That's right. As people of faith in, out in an industry that's not known at all for faith, if anything, mocking it. Yeah. Maybe the scariest, loneliest thing other than planting a church might be what you're doing. So, have you had people like mock your faith or like find yourself feeling very isolated and alone? I know across this room is probably representing all the industry of Austin, all different kinds of workplaces represented here, and a lot of people who probably feel lonely in those places because they do have faith that they stand on, and people will treat them differently because of that. How do you guys navigate that? Because you probably get openly made fun of for being Christian guys.
I was very afraid of that when I first started doing stand-up. The first place I ever did stand-up is in Atlanta. This little awesome club called the Laughing Skull Lounge. And you walk past a statue of something I probably can't say on this podcast to get into the showroom. And it's just like a seedy, back of a bar type of place. A place I had not spent much time in, those type of places growing up. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to a place where people are not going to like me because of who I am. And I was so pleasantly surprised that people don't really have that attitude. And maybe this is just in the stand-up world, but I have not felt from any comedians that are good at stand-up, like anything other than like, oh, you believe that? That's interesting. I would love to talk to you. Like it's a genuine curiosity thing, and not as long as you're not a hateful person. Like people usually are kind of okay with it. I remember I was very scared. 2 years ago, I got a call I was going to go open for Mark Maron, who's a great comedian, but very openly against church and big church, and he has specials about the dangers of church and Jesus, and I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna go open for him. It's gonna be an adventure. But I was like, he is gonna hate me. This guy's gonna hate me. And I go backstage and comes into my green room, and goes, Andrew, it's so nice to meet you. I've heard great things about you. So nice. And I'm like, yeah, I'm a preacher's kid. I'm telling him about myself, and he's like, that's so interesting. He's asking me. Just had a great conversation. I was like, oh, this is not scary. People are people, and as long as you're around good people, I feel like people just want to understand where you're coming from. And if anybody just is immediately like, you're this, then get out. I mean, that's not the people you're trying to be around anyway.
Yeah. Laughing Skull also is where I kind of came up to. And I think it can be, Andrew did have a great qualifying statement. Good comedians typically are pretty open to it because they're very inquisitive, interesting people. But definitely for me starting out too, there was a feeling of, if you are clean, oftentimes it can be easy to be more corny or just like say things that don't get any laugh at all because there's no cheap laughs and it wasn't funny. And so you can bomb way harder by being clean, and then people oftentimes will revert to other forms of comedy or whatever, and that could and can be very isolating. But I think to Andrew's point, I think that a lot of comedians are very inquisitive, especially the ones who are really good. And so it was really cool to see and be around comics who are really just way better than me and very different, but still wanted to know and learn and understand why you thought the way you do. And then the audience too, I kind of had a similar fear when I started, and then I realized people really responded to it. Again, authenticity. If you're genuinely who you are on stage, people can really feel it. And whether they believe in God or they go to church or they don't, I think people can feel that sort of joy. And that people really responded to early on. I was really, really grateful for that.
The awesome thing about stand-up is that it really is just funny wins. If you're funny, it doesn't matter what you're talking about. You can be dirty, clean, whatever. If you're the funniest, people are gonna like you. Audience gonna like you. Other comedians are gonna respect you. The funny is really the metric for respect more than anything else. It kind of outweighs it so heavily that it's hard to get judged for anything, really. But it is fun. I feel like I'm a lot of people's only Christian friend.
Yeah, I feel that all the time.
Kind of a cool position to be in.
A lot of theological questions for sure in the back of a green room.
Oh, I bet. It does seem like there's tons of curiosity just in culture in general, but even in the comedy world, every podcast, it seems like there's somebody who's got faith and they're talking about it. There's so much genuine curiosity. Have you had people that have come to you like, hey, so I've noticed like you're different in the way you operate. You don't quite say the same things a lot of guys do. You don't live the same way a lot of guys do, and ask you about that and why you live the way you do?
My big one, you're in the green room, people are like, "I'm gonna ask you about church," and they go, "Here's the moment. This is why I'm here." And but it doesn't happen that much. The big one for me was, my dad's a pastor, my granddad's a pastor, and when the show Righteous Gemstones came out, all my friends were just like, "Andrew, is this what your life was like?" And I was just like,
This is a documentary. That's my favorite.
No, I was just like, no, I see where they got the stuff, but not exactly. But
Yeah, no, I think I love those kinds of discussions and like theological discussions, and comedians oftentimes, again, very inquisitive, have a lot of like, they're funny, but they also have wit, and I've had so many conversations in the back of a green room about like, why do you believe these things? And it was great for me because it made me like think through it too, because sometimes you don't even think through it, and trying to explain it to someone else, you're like, oh, I'll get back to you in a week. Let me think about that a little more.
yeah, if you're only hanging out with other Christians, you realize you're not asking yourself you take a lot of things for granted. It does make you challenge your own faith when somebody else is asking you questions about faith, because you're just like, oh, yeah, I haven't thought about that in a while.
Yeah, you've been doing your research. They came in prepped, and I was not prepped.
Yeah, you start to explain, there's this guy, and he died, but then he wasn't dead, and there's times where you're like, this is kind of crazy. Like, I get why
Somebody
people...
got swallowed by a whale, and...
I used your 3 peas in a pod analogy for the Holy Trinity.
Oh, great.
That's great,
yeah.
Great episode. If you haven't listened to that, listen to that episode.
You're welcome, Donald. You're welcome, man. I'll send you more.
Yeah.
I got a question for you guys, and I think every single person in here deals with comparison in some way, shape, or form. Except for Ryan.
I picked up on that, yeah.
Ryan, he preached this weekend, so he's half here right now.
Yeah, no mic for you.
We only had 4 microphones.
And I've been told, as any kind of communicator, it takes a while to sort of find your voice. And even in the preaching world, that it's okay to be a bit of an echo as you are discovering your voice. And in the world of comedy, is it difficult not to compare? Is it difficult to celebrate the wins of other comedians, or a guy who's on stage right before you who just absolutely murders it and crushes it?
That's how Andrew's going to feel when I go up on stage
Right.
before him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, if you look in my eyes while Donald's performing, you'll know the answer to the question.
This is moderately funny, exactly the way he promised it would be.
Of course, is
yeah.
the answer. I mean, I think that we all know deep down, like, comparison is not good for us, and we're not trying to do it, but of course it happens. And of course there's people's careers that there's versions of you like, I hope to have a career like them one day, and then sometimes you're like, oh, they got that? Good for them. Why did I not immediately just feel happy for them? Let me check that in myself, because that's a me thing, not a them thing. But yeah, you're always comparing yourself, and there's helpful ways to compare yourself. You're always trying to say, what do I want, and who's done it, and how did they do it, and you try to also think, who's behind me that I can help. But yeah, you're always comparing yourself to people. But then, like you said, when you start out and you're echoing people, I think that's an accepted thing in the comedy community, that when you start out, you don't know what to do, and so you're kind of doing a version of your 3 favorite comedians combined when you're not their material, but you can kind of look at new comedians and be like, okay, I can tell who they like, kind of how they're going, and there's some of that too. Same for pastors, I have noticed.
Oh yeah, I've been an echo of your dad
TD
quite a few
Jakes,
times. So
Has that been hard? Has that been the biggest struggle for your dad? His comparison with me after he watched?
Yeah, he's
documentary?
people are like, which one came first? It's just hard to tell.
Ever since he watched that documentary, it just seems like he has no self-confidence, knowing what he'll never
That's
do.
what he told me, that he started watching it and then he had to stop because he was like, I'm starting to sound like him because I'm consuming too much of his
Stupid, whiny
stuff.
24-year-old guy who traveled around. Yeah, I'm praying for your dad a lot.
Yeah,
man.
on that topic of comparison, like I think a lot of people struggle with that, and I had a very like acute experience with it in terms of social media because I grew up in Iowa. I grew up like our family, we didn't have social media, didn't even watch TV, like wasn't allowed to use the internet. So like I like really started using social media maybe 2 years ago, and I was like 24. And I had like literally I didn't have a smartphone until I was like 21. And so
He's from Iowa. Take it easy on him.
and I knew I wanted to do comedy, and I felt like social media was an important part of it, so I like downloaded it and like started using it, and I felt these very intense like feelings of comparison, where I was like, oh, like this skier guy has like 5 million followers, like maybe I should ski. And I've never skied in my life.
Maybe that's God's will for my life.
Yeah.
That lines up.
And
spiritual
this, like, this is just like a week of like consuming content, of whether it was comedians or those people, and I like took a step back and I was like, what is happening to my brain? And it made me really evaluate, like, okay, like this is that feeling, and it genuinely had like felt more anxious or depressed. I felt much less sure of who I was as a person and what my like purpose was, and because again, like maybe I should ski, maybe I should be a runner, all these like niches that people were already successful in. I was like, I wanted the success, but I didn't want like the journey that they had already done to get there. And then I took a step back and was like, okay, how can I be genuine with who I am and communicate that through a thing and build that for myself. And so yeah, really, that can hit really hard for a lot of people.
Okay, I have one more question. My friend once told me his theory. He said comedians are modern day prophets. Because, and I know that's an intimidating high bar. I don't mean it that way, but in the sense that comedians can kind of say some things that maybe everybody else can't really say in what they call the age of offense, and everybody's offended by things, and using humor as such an amazing tool to make light of things that, whether it's like, oh, that's a touchy subject, or we can't go there. Do you notice over the years that sort of like the tide of that going out and coming back in, or sort of like waning and waxing, like how much of an offended culture we're in? And is it less offended? Is our culture less offended than we were 5 years ago, than we were 6 years ago? I'm just curious, because I got to imagine when you're writing jokes and you're prepping for, to get up and do 20 minutes in front of a crowd, that you think about offending or not offending.
Especially if religion and faith are involved.
Yeah.
Because that can be the most sensitive topic to anybody.
Yeah, I mean, you're always trying to figure out where the line is, and for me, it's always like a lot of my calendar is private events where somebody's bringing me in to do their volunteer appreciation night at their church, and that night I'm like, all right, I'm working for you. Like, I might have a joke that I want to do, but I'm like, you're hiring me to do the best job I can for this group, so I'm gonna not do it, even though I would if it was my show. And then if it's my show, I'm gonna do it because I'm like, yeah, it's my show. And it's about kind of knowing, one, where you are and who you're working for. And I'm like, tonight, am I working for me or am I working for somebody who hired me? And so I try to distinguish it that way. I think that the line is always just depends on who's in the room. Like, for us, we're not pushing the big lines, but like I have like done a church show where they were drinking beer in the room in Tyler, Texas, and then I did a church show where they were not thrilled that I used the word beer in one of my jokes. And it's just like, yeah, it's all different everywhere. I think over the country, of course, it ebbs and flows, and we overcorrect and then swing back, and that's just kind of the nature of most things. I don't think people really get canceled. Unless you go to jail. I mean,
not anymore.
Everybody has their own audience. So like, yeah, you might not be able to be as mainstream, but like nobody's really truly getting canceled unless you break the law or do something like horrific.
Yeah, and like to that thing of cancel, I think like the cancel thing was a unique moment in time where people were still being like, there were still gatekeepers who were choosing who had access to create a comedy special. And if there was enough public pressure that those gatekeepers would be like, okay, not you anymore, right? We can't give you the funding, we can't give you whatever. And now that creating content and media is so accessible to so many people, it's much, much harder to actually like cancel somebody because if they're speaking to their audience base probably likes what they're saying. Even if on Twitter 10 million people hate them, if they have a million people who are giving them $10 tickets every year, they're still making $10 million and doing incredibly well. And so I think that's been an interesting shift. For like 5 years ago, absolutely. That was an interesting thing. My parents were terrified. They're like, you cannot be a comedian, you're gonna say something. Yeah. We're all gonna lose everything.
Your parents talk like that?
Yeah, that's how they sound.
How they sound?
They're actually Amish.
But from the South in
You can make fun of Amish. You're never gonna get canceled from an Amish person. They're not on Twitter. But I think now it's like a very different media environment for sure.
And to answer the first part of your question about the modern day prophet thing, I think
That's him.
yeah, it's
He's
me.
him.
Yeah, I'm actually here to come out as a prophet to you guys.
Sunday service.
Give
South
us a
by
word.
Southwest.
I think that comedians do. It always has been this person that doesn't have a boss. So you can say it like it is. There's comedians that are so good at looking at whether it's politics or big things going on in the world and saying stuff in a way that someone in a different position can't, or people won't listen. And comedy is such a tool to bring down people's barriers. And I mean, just like the same reason you start a sermon with a joke or something funny, and it kind of people. They get less tense and they're willing to maybe receive what you're going to say after that. Like comedy works in the same way, where it's like, I'm going to talk about something sensitive, but I promise I'm going to take care of you the whole way by making you laugh throughout it. So it's not going to be this hard thing to hear. And I don't think either Donald or I do that type of comedy, but the ones that do, I'm in awe of. When you see somebody, you're talking about something that's so controversial, but you're so smart, and it's funny the whole time. And did I change my mind at the end of your joke? That's crazy. Like it is like a magic thing or prophecy or whatever.
Well, honored to be here with a modern day prophet.
Thank you.
And a guy named Donald. What a time to be named Donald. We didn't get to that, but they're flashing the clock at us, which I think means they want us to keep talking.
Did you want to say anything, by the way?
Oh, no, I'm just here to hang out.
Ryan's.
You're the only one that drank your water bottle, dude.
Good job. Hey, thank you for modeling hydration. Guys like you are a refreshing part of the body of Christ that we very much need. So thank you for what you do. And if we did nothing else but bring a room full of people together to see some of the humor and joy that comes with walking with God and having a relationship with Him, then I think it was well worth the time. I'm excited for your sets. Go over and watch these two.
Yeah, watch us bomb now so bad.
Get ready for some moderately funny stand-up. Last thing, how can people follow you guys and track your careers and all that you're doing?
AndrewStanleyComedy.com, Andrew Stanley on all the social medias. I've got my first special coming out later this year.
Let's go.
So it's going to be big, and thank you. Yeah. And you can catch me next door in about 20 minutes. So.
Yeah, I think come next door, and so the whole thing with, again, I want to thank Zach for helping
Zach.
make this whole comedy track happen. The shows both nights are under kind of the brand Classy Country Crazy, which is sort of trying to, again, have a comedy show that brings joy. You leave more joyful than you came in, and so kind of follow through there. Social media-wise, I don't have any personal social media. You'll hear about it if you come to the comedy show, why, but I do have an account that is a fake French news reporter called Louis Laurent.
You guys have to follow it.
I guess I'm going to talk about that. That's
whatever you're imagining, it's way better.
This has been a great teaser for your set. Well done. Thank you all for coming today. And we'll get you guys back to Austin. We'll get you on an episode. We'll have some fun. Thanks, dudes.